Come on in. I want to review some PowerPoint slides about chapters 8, 9, and 10. And in 8, we're really talking about self-efficacy, optimism, and hope. When we define self-efficacy, we're talking about your belief in your capability to be able to produce some outcome or effect by your actions. The desired goal is what we refer to as the outcome expectancies. And your capability, your belief that you can do this is really about efficacy expectations and has to do with your motivation. The efficacy part is more important. So, your belief that you can do that is what really matters in self efficacy. Where does self-efficacy come from? It's based on Bandura's social cognitive theory that we create these models, cognitive models, by how others respond to us, and we observe ourselves in relation to these models. So how capable are you at something? Bandura talked about developmental antecedents, and what that means is they precede the development of self-efficacy as you are a young person, a child, and you're developing. And here are some examples the book talked about. Your previous success at doing something, doing what others do. You notice young children often want to mimic what the adults around them are doing. This is helping them to develop self-efficacy. Imagining yourself being successful, more aroused you are. If you're having positive emotions, also helps you to feel a sense of self-efficacy. And then verbal persuasion from others. In other words, you borrow your self-efficacy from adults, and if they're trusted, you believe them that you can do this. It's also influenced by gender roles. Women seem to have a higher self-efficacy in language arts, whereas men report higher self-efficacy in subjects like math, social science, and computer science. Individualistic and collectivist cultures also view this differently. In the United States, where we're more individualistic, we would rate ourselves higher. So we come off as having higher self-efficacy, even if perhaps that rating is not warranted. And some groups have been limited in the ability to perceive their goals, so we don't have a good sense about their self-efficacy. Can we measure it? That's what psychologists are also quite interested in. And the key idea here is it the situation? Does the situation matter what subject you're in, or is it a trait? And there's evidence that both are true. The self-efficacy scale has 23 items. The new general self-efficacy scale has 8. And Bandura would say, well, you shouldn't measure it as a trait that some things people innately have. It really depends on the situation. And he would say that it also influences our life arenas in terms of our psychological adjustment is more positive. We have better physical health. Psychotherapy outcomes are better if you have higher self-efficacy, which makes sense if you're motivated and believe you can make those changes that you need to make. And cultural competence, the ability to navigate in new situations, cultures, and acculturation also seem related. Well, what about optimism? Again, we have the same idea. It's partly learned, and maybe there's also a trait, a genetic basis for it. When we talk about the learned part, we talk about learned optimism, and Seligman and his colleagues talk about this, that optimists are externally focused. When there's a failure, it's not about them. It's variable, it's not going to last, and it's very specific. So that means you're optimistic in your explanation. On the other hand, a pessimist would look at his failure as internal to them, that they had something to do with it, that it's stable, it's always going to be this way, and global, meaning it applies to other situations. Seligman says we can learn optimism, we can learn to reframe our thinking about successes and failures. And some childhood antecedents, again meaning happened early in childhood, are that your parents model it. Trauma can undermine optimism because if you have lots of traumatic events that can pile up, and television can actually make us more pessimistic. The genetic basis for optimism says, well, it's about expectancies of reaching a desired goal, and that there's a stable tendency about this, and that this too comes from some childhood experiences. Optimism also predicts certain flourishing outcomes. Optimists are more likely to use problem solving and approach oriented strategies when facing difficulty. We can use the life orientation test, R, revised predictions. And it seems the immune system can be suppressed if you are less optimistic. What about hope? So we've got self-efficacy, we've got optimism, and hope. Hope is about goal-directed thinking. Like I am hopeful that this thing might happen. With pathways thinking, meaning I see a way to make that happen, and agency thinking, meaning I'm motivated to take one of those paths. The more positive emotions we have, the more likely we are to have a goal achievement orientation. Again, what are these childhood antecedents? Well, parents, again, are very important. They teach both pathways. Can you think about some ways you can learn to jump up there on that jungle gym? An agency, like providing the feedback for motivation. Having strong, positive, I would say secure attachment is crucial with parents. Again, childhood trauma can diminish hope as it can optimism. And individuals with more hope are less susceptible to depression. We know some about the neurobiology of hope in terms of our behavioral inhibition and activation system. It seems to protect us, and it's involved in some brain areas. The prospection pipeline is what the book talked about. So hope might inhibit some of those negative feelings and activates us towards action to achieve our goals. Hope also is associated with some predictions. It predicts outcomes in academics. Students do better if they're more hopeful. There is a combination with ethnic identity. Physical health, adjustment, and psychotherapy are also influenced by hope. And there are cultural differences in our agentic thinking, meaning we believe that we can make something happen. You have less hope is related to increase in suicides. And there are also some racial differences in interactions with other constructs in hope. The last thought is from this chapter is about our temporal dimensions. And temporal really is referring to our sense of time. How are you oriented? And the book suggests some ways to find out if you're not sure. Do you think a lot about the past? Are you more oriented in the present, the here and now, or are you future oriented? The Western perspective that most of us have alters our views on the past and present. We tend to be more present orientation. And the more flexible and capable you are to switch orientations, the better you can be. So Western focuses on future. We're present and future oriented. There's also this idea about polychronic, many things at once. Native Americans tend to think this way versus monochronic, meaning time is linear and sequential. This has to do with what we're valuing in terms of goals. Like, do I need to stop right now? Time is money and get this done? Or am I recognizing that a lot of things are happening and there'll be a right time for different interactions, and I might not be as sensitive to being there, quote, on time because these other things that I value are going on. There's less temporal or concerns with time in Eastern cultures. Well, that's a wrap on Chapter 8. Let's take a look at Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is all about wisdom and courage. So thinking about our theories of wisdom, well, it's an old, ancient idea. We've had some philosophical, what does it mean, versus pragmatic, what does it actually mean in real life, ideas about it. And we're going to talk about implicit, meaning sort of unlearned theories, as well as explicit, looking at those actual behaviors of wisdom. Implicit is sort of what's unlearned but associated. And here are some of the theories the book talked about when thinking about philosophy and culture and wisdom and children's belief on it. And you should just sort of be familiar that, what are the words associated with these implicit theories of wisdom? And it does differ by context. Our explicit theories were focused more on the behaviors. Piaget talks about these dialectical operations. Erikson talks about it as part of optimal development. It's one of the ideas you develop as a successful resolution of one of life's stages. Sternberg talks about it in his balance theory. And I like Balt's Berlin wisdom paradigm, where it's really about the ways and means of planning, managing, and understanding a good life. How do we develop wisdom? How do you become wise? Well, it builds on your knowledge, certainly, as well as your ability to think, cognitive skills, and reason, as well as some personality characteristics. Your life experiences and tutoring and thinking about what is a wise decision is important, and it grows and develops through problem solving, having to face some of the challenges even the book talks about. It presents you some challenges. It's transmitted from generation to generation, often through stories, folk stories, or stories we even tell in families. When we look at wise people, they tend to have greater life satisfaction. There are also some gender differences in cognitive and affective meaning how you're feeling about it, wisdom. And there's a lot of development in this area between the ages of 15 and 25, the ages which many of you are at now. Having a greater education level is associated with greater wisdom, although there are some cultural differences. In Japan, for example, people tend to have wisdom sort of at each stage of life, whereas in the United States it appears to increase with age. Certainly this would be learned, and how it's influenced by your environment and what you're asked to think about. Wisdom can also be used as a coping strategy, and the book talks them about one of the famous psychotherapists who helps others with to be wise, to cope. Benefits of wisdom are some more positive inter and interpersonal qualities. There's greater reflection and personal growth. You're able to be more flexible, adaptive, and grateful, and tend to rate higher on well-being and have greater humility when you are rated as being more wise. What about courage? These ideas sometimes are studied together. Courage, too, is appreciated in many cultures, and it's been a long time interest of scholars. Cicero talked about magnificent courage, confidence, patience, and perseverance as part of being courage. These implicit theories of courage talk about core human virtues, and it might be physical courage, rushing out in battle, moral courage to make the right decision, and vital courage. It's called for right now at the moment. Like, and here's some sort of other examples about physical courage, maintaining societal good, moral preservation of justice, and this vital. You're battling disease or disability, something that just sort of happened to you, and you have to face that or not. Some other implicit theories are psychological. So, how do you face destructive habits and make changes, or civil, enforcing social and ethical norms? And this we can see a lot in our society today with some of the discussions about Black Lives Matter. Where are people courageous? What's the civil courage? And what is it to be wise in those situations? It's not always easy to say. In terms of becoming and being courageous, again, children's views on courage and fear matter. There are risks of not being courageous, and personal traits can certainly lead to courageous actions. Here's some other theories about how attitudes and modeling courage through leadership and having a courageous mindset can matter. We measure courage. Here's several scales that are used for children and also for adults. There are a lack of measures in some ways because we don't have a comprehensive theory of courage. So, what would you measure, that vital courage or the moral courage? There are some relationships between fear and courage. They're often viewed as synonymous. So fearlessness is like being courageous, and there's certainly behavioral and physical responses to fear. So there may also be a genetic component to this. And in fact, we know that people who are courageous have higher levels of agreeableness and openness on the Big Five, which is the Big Five personality trait has a genetic basis. There's negative relationship with anxiety and greater coping and higher confidence among courageous people. We can see harmony, trying to create harmony as being courageous. There's certainly cultural differences in how we conceptualize courage. For example, between the United States and China, race relations may require courage. And as the book talked about, sometimes you are given more opportunities to have to behave courageously, like LGBTQ populations, where they have to act this way out of necessity. Well, this is a wrap on Chapter 9. Let's take a look at Chapter 10 next. Chapter 10 is all about mindfulness, flow, one of my favorite ideas in positive psychology, and spirituality. Well, mindfulness is a state of mind. It's also been studied by ancient people. It's part of religion, Western and Buddhist mindfulness conceptions. It's really about cultivating awareness of the present, not worrying about what's going to happen next or what happened previously. And part of mindfulness is this active search for novelty, but just letting our mind rest. The three requirements of being mindful are: you need to overcome your desire to reduce uncertainty about what's going to happen next. We often have to override our automatic behavior to start paying attention, or phone rings, we need to answer that. No, not mindful. You don't always need to answer your phone the moment that it rings. And you evaluate yourself and others less. So you're just observing in a non-judgmental way. As a state of mind, it hopefully becomes automatic behavior, and it then reduces unnecessary judgments because you just are present. It allows us to regulate our attention and be more open to situations because we're not so busy judging or evaluating or analyzing them. We're just accepting them. The benefits of mindfulness, especially it's cultivated often through meditation. It helps cope with stigma. There's mindfulness-based therapies and treatments. It's associated often with meditation, and people who are more mindful have better special abilities in terms of awareness. Their brain appears to have more neuroplasticity, meaning different parts of the brain can take up different actions. And it can exist as top down, you're thinking deliberately about it, or bottom up, it's just sort of naturally occurring. The more you practice it intentionally, that top down approach, the more automatic it will be. You can cultivate it, and these techniques spur some positive changes. Brief mindfulness training has been found to be quite beneficial as part of cultural intelligence, and it can be taught to children. Mindfulness is also associated with this idea of flow. Mike Mihaly, he goes by Mike, Csikszentmihalyi, really analyzed this in a study of teenagers. I've heard him speak a number of times. And he, I think, is one of the most interesting psychologists living today. He observed flow experiences through time and really identified there's two conditions of flow: that you have some perceived challenge at the right level. It's a little more difficult than normal, but not overly so to create a lot of anxiety. And there's clear goals and immediate feedback. This is in contrast with boredom, which is the challenge is not sufficient enough, or too much challenge, which creates anxiety. And the book has a nice picture of that wheel to show you where you kind of move in and out of flow experiences. So we don't stay in flow because our abilities increase. And so then it's not as challenging. So we move back out of that. And the idea is, how can you spend more of your life, day, time in flow? Again, the idea is to have some challenge, and that's a little bit above your skill level, that helps you develop your skill. And a particular activities do matter. So you tend to experience flow more in certain situations than others. And it does take that controlled and efficient attention. He talks about the autotelic personality are people who are intrinsically motivated to have high challenge, high skill situations. So you can want to be in flow more. This exists even in teenagers. And you have less stress when you're in flow. I certainly recommend it. When we talk about sports, sometimes we talk about being in the zone, and you can almost think of that as a flow moment. Spirituality is another related concept, and it's our search for the sacred. It's the strength of transcendence. We're going to transcend our present situation, and it's often paired with similar but different concepts. It can lead to well-being, so greater spirituality is also associated with better mental health, increased hope and optimism, and successful aging. Now, the mechanisms that lead to these positive outcomes are still unclear to psychologists. There seems to be some nuanced relationships with well-being, but it's certainly beneficial in times of strife. When we talk about spirituality in cultural context, it's linked to positive outcomes for many groups. And in fact, we find the negative effects of racism are often buffered by spirituality. And there's even spirituality for LGBTQ individuals can help buffer them if they are in that right setting that provides those important relationships and support. I hope this overview of key terms a little bit more in detail has been helpful as we examine some really important cognitive concepts related to flourishing this week.